Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for coming in today. Ms Chiswick, just want to pick up on some of the responses to the Chair just now. In regards to the data that you collect, you said it's a closed loop. So Big Brother Watch has been doing a lot of work around this. So can we confirm that all of the data that you collect, say, at the coronation of live facial recognition, that all of that data has been deleted?
We don't collect data, actually, on a live facial recognition deployment. If you're imagining you're in the crowd and you walk past the camera instantaneously will compare the faces it sees to the watch list. It's literally instantaneous. Mm-hmm. If you're not on that watch list, not only is your facial image immediately and forever deleted, but also it's pixelated. And this is what we call a privacy by design function, which means if you're an officer sitting in the van looking at that succession of people coming past the cameras, you can't even see the individual faces. They're all pixelated. Okay. The only exception to that is if we get a hit, a positive match, in which case the match can be retained for 31 days or longer if it's needed for judicial purposes. Okay,
so in regards to if you get a match,
yes.
Is it not correct that 81% of people flagged by live facial recognition were in fact innocent?
I don't recognise those figures. I know those figures keep popping up, and maybe it's something we can talk about when we come onto the National Physical Laboratory report and what we found out about the accuracy of the algorithm. But as an example, at the coronation, there were 2 positive matches, and that, to me, shows the precision of that technology. And they were both accurate.
But how many false matches were
0.
there? 'Cause so that is the issue, isn't it? Because in January 2022, the Met deployed LFR near Oxford Circus, and 1 person was triggered on the alert. They were subsequently stopped. They weren't the person. They were innocent. They provided ID to show they were not the person on the watch list, but then they were subjected to further scrutiny and biometric tests before they were allowed to let go. So does that not imply that you're therefore assuming that people are guilty rather than innocent? Why did that person have to provide further information? Because the live facial recognition was incorrect.
So I don't, unfortunately, have details of that specific incident with me, but I'm very happy to provide further details on it later.
Does Dr. Mansfield, are you familiar with that particular incident?
I'm not familiar.
You're not? Okay, that's fine.
Does it worry you, though? Does it worry you that there's an over-reliance on a system that is 81% incorrect, so much so that if somebody is stopped and says, well, I'm not that person, it's like, well, prove it to us again?
There's two ways I want to answer that. First of all, I can look back at the last 6 deployments we've done, and I can tell you of those 6 deployments, we have had 2, 3, 4 true alerts and 0 false alerts. I'll need to go back to your 2022 example, but that's as an example of just how precise the technology is. It's not flagging alerts all the time.
Isn't it how you measure it? How, when you say 0 false alerts, it's only because you're only counting your positive alerts. So what does that mean? What does that mean exactly? I think
we count true alerts and we count false alerts, and we test the system throughout a deployment by having what we call a blue list, which are our own members of staff and officers who are on a separate watch list, who pass through the system every, I think, 40 minutes or so to check that it's working accurately and it's not simply just not detecting anybody. The other thing, I said I answered in 2 ways. The second answer to what you're saying is what happens when an alert happens? What does the officer do? So the facial recognition of technology only takes you so far. It takes you to the point of a potential identification, that's all. And it will show the watch list picture, and it will show the picture of the individual who's a potential identification on the mobile phone device that the officer carries.
Of the police officer?
Yeah, to the police officer. And they'll look at that, and that's when their normal officer powers kick in, and they'll look at it and they'll think, is that a match? Is that a likely match? If they don't think it's a match, they don't need to do anything. They're not compelled to make the stop.
But that's on paper.
If they think it's a match, there's no immediate arrest. They'll go and talk to that person and have an engagement. That's similar to any day-to-day activity of a police officer who acts usually on suspicion. At this point, they're having a tool, a very accurate tool, to point them in the right direction. So then all the other activity you saw subsequent to that is standard officer engagement.
So standard officer engagement in regards, for instance, to stop and search is disproportionately discriminates against young black men. And in all cases, and the Met being one of the highest, 80% of the times nothing's found. So if you're building a system based on a already discriminatory system, then you're making that discrimination worse. Can I ask you another question? Do we have a demographic breakdown of the watch list that the Met currently hold?
So no, we don't, and that's because we don't go after individuals on the watch list. We don't say, let's take that named person and put them on the watch list. The watch list is made up of crime types. So the demographic balance of that is not something that's considered. It's the crime types, it's the wanted people in the area at the time, and immediately afterwards, as I was saying, that watch list is deleted.
Can we get a demographic breakdown of the watch list?
We haven't done that because there's no policing purpose to retain and then process that information for that reason.
If you have a watch list that's 90% women, it would mean that you're looking for women in a crowd, because that's on your... If a woman flags up, you'd be like, oh, right, okay, that woman is the person that's on our watch list. There's more of a match there. So there is a correlation between the demographic breakdown of the watch list and what you do with that information. So is it possible to get a breakdown?
So first of all, we'd never put a watch list together which was 90% any demographic differential.
But if you don't measure it, how do you know?
It's not how it's done. It's based on crime types, people who are wanted for robbery offences in the area, people who are wanted on court warrants. And there's a breakdown and a list of the types of offences, the types of reasons to be included in the watch list on our policy. So that's available and open to the public. So we wouldn't go after a specific demographic. That wouldn't be right, would it?
Can you provide the committee with a breakdown?
So I can't, because we delete the watch list within 24 hours immediately after the deployment, and there isn't a policing purpose to process the data in that way. Technically...
You say you delete the watch list?
Yes.
So you haven't got a watch list? The Met hasn't got a watch list?
So the watch list is bespoke to the individual deployment. So each live facial recognition deployment we do, we create a very bespoke watch list of crime types which mirror the reason for being in that area in the first place. We then, at the end of the deployment, delete that watch list, which was bespoke to the deployment. And then if we were going to deploy again somewhere else for a different reason, we'd create a different watch list of different crime types.
So there's no way at any time of getting a breakdown. And you only have a watch list, a temporary watch list. There's never a permanent watch list.
It's not a permanent watch list for live facial recognition technology. For every deployment, it's based on an individual intelligence case, which is the reason why it's both proportionate and necessary for us to be in that area operating at the time. That watch list is then bespoke to the deployment. We use it, and then we delete it, because there's no lawful reason for us to retain that data. Technically, we could do it, keep the watch list, but lawfully we can't. We delete it each time because there's no policing reason to process data purely to find out demographic difference within a watch list.
Do you see any risks at all with live facial recognition or other facial recognitions or AI and its deployment in the Met?
I completely understand public concern around live facial recognition technology and AI, and there's lots of debate going on around that at the moment. What I've tried to do with the introduction of facial recognition technology in the Met is do so in a careful, proportionate and as transparent as we possibly can be way. So we've published an awful lot of information online about how we operate, about exactly some of the things we were just talking about the distinctions of who can and can't be on a watch list, and all of the safeguards we've put in place in order to to protect people.
What risks have you identified?
Gosh, I think we can run through the risks and the safeguards we've put in place at every single stage of the operation. So starting right at the beginning, I talked about necessity and proportionality of why we're going there in the first place. This isn't a fishing expedition. We're targeting areas where there's public concern about high levels of crime, whether that's thefts and knife-enabled thefts on Oxford Street, where they operated before, or whether it was some of the gang-related violence and also knife-enabled robbery going on in Camden. So there's some examples of specific use cases. Carrying that through from why we're there in the first place, there's then the proportionality of the watch list, following our policy as to who goes on there and why. And then on the day of deployment, we have safeguards in place there. So we won't run the deployment if there's something wrong with the technology. The images that are accepted into watch lists need to be of a certain quality. The cameras need to be operating in a certain way to make sure they're also as accurate as we can make them. Throughout the deployment, there's special training given to officers who are going to deploy on the ground, which pulls out some of your concerns.
Sorry, just one last. Does the training include further intrusion if somebody innocent has been identified? And my last question is, does it concern you in any way that the Metropolitan Police is currently institutionally racist, homophobic and misogynistic, and how that will affect the use of this technology?
Can I deal with institutional racism first, and then I'll come back to the further intrusion, because I'm not sure I fully understood that. You're referring to Baroness Casey's report and other incidents, and it's truly shocking what was in that report, and we have let the public and our own people down. I was shocked at some of the findings. I, at the same time, see it as an opportunity for reform. I think we must turn things around, and I hope the very careful way we've been approaching the deployment of live facial recognition technology is just that. So some of the work we've done with the National Physical Laboratory in order to really get to the heart of the bias in that technology and understand how we can use AI but use it in a proportionate, fair and equal way has been hugely important to me. That's why we publish what we can online in order to be as transparent as we can. And then before we deploy, we do an awful lot of engagement. So we engage not only with commissioners, with civil society, with various groups, we also engage with different community groups and different demographic differentials across the piece to understand their feelings about the technology. And then before we actually go to a location to deploy, we do something called a community impact assessment, where we go out and talk to members of the community about how they feel about having live facial recognition deployed there.
Is it not the case that there was one person who, I think Big Brother Watch, held up a sign saying the police are operating live facial recognition, they avoided where the police were, and then they got a £90 fine because they covered their face? And that was then assumed that they had something to hide, whereas they just didn't want to be on a police camera, which we police by consent in this country. So if you don't want the police to take an image of your face, which is like a fingerprint, then we police by consent. That's your choice.
We do police by consent, and at any live facial recognition deployment, and those who want to are very welcome to come out and see one actually in operation. We put notices up to tell the public that live facial recognition is going on. By the time
they get to the notice, their faces have already been in the system, because by the time you get to the notice, the camera's already taken a facial picture of them. Sorry, Chair.
No, it's an important area, but Ms. Chiswick, just answer that, please.
So the placement of the signage is prior to getting onto the vision of the camera. The view of the camera is actually quite short. And again, if you want to come out and have a look, you can see the sort of zone of recognition and how far that goes along the road. We also, depending on the deployment and what we're seeking to do, publish on social media what we're going to be doing. So it is foreseeable to the public. We don't force people to walk through the cameras. I've been on the scene and many people have turned around and decided not to walk through the cameras. That's absolutely fine. But it is used as part of a wider policing operation usually. There will be police as officers on the ground, and if they make an informed choice to stop an individual, that's a policing decision.